Evicted from their home by their children, they discover a secret passageway, but what was inside? Arthur and Eleanor never imagined that after 50 years of marriage and a lifetime of sacrifices for their children, they would end up walking through the snow with just 2 old suitcases and their hearts shattered. It was then that Arthur stumbled on what seemed to be just a hole covered by snow. As he tried to get up, his hands touched something wooden buried in the frozen ground. "Eleanor, come here," he called, brushing away the snow with his hands already numb from the cold. "There's something down here." The woman approached, still wiping the tears that hadn't stopped falling since they left home 2 hours earlier. Her grey hair escaped from her woolen hat, and the yellow coat she wore couldn't warm the cold she felt inside. "What is it, Arthur?" she asked, watching her husband remove more snow. It was a wooden hatch, old and sturdy, with rusty but still functional bolts. Arthur forced it open and revealed a stone staircase descending into darkness. "My goodness," whispered Eleanor, covering her mouth with her gloved hands. "What is this place?" "I don't know, but it's freezing out here," replied Arthur, looking at the heavy clouds that promised more snow. "Let's take a look. Maybe we can take shelter until this storm passes." The two cautiously descended the slippery steps. Arthur used his lighter to light the way, and soon they found an old switch on the wall. To their surprise, when he turned the knob, a faint light bulb came on. "It still has power," he murmured, amazed. What they saw left them speechless. It was a complete underground shelter, with furniture covered by white sheets, a small kitchen, 2 beds, and even a stone fireplace. Everything was dusty but surprisingly well preserved. "Who could have built this?" asked Eleanor, walking slowly through the space. Arthur removed one of the sheets and revealed an old leather armchair. On a small table there were some yellowed papers. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out." Now continuing. "Look at this," he said, carefully picking up the documents. Eleanor approached as Arthur read the papers in the faint light. They were old deeds, letters, and other documents that seemed decades old. "Arthur, are you reading that right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am. This here—" He stopped speaking for a moment, rereading the document. "This here is the deed to a property, and the owner's name is Silas Sterling Harrison." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the wind outside. Eleanor sat down heavily in the armchair. "Silas was your grandfather's name," she said, almost whispering. "It was," confirmed Arthur, his hands trembling as he held the papers. "And Sterling Harrison is our full surname." Eleanor stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in the small space. "But how can that be? You always said your grandfather lost everything when your parents were children, that he was left in poverty and had to sell everything to pay the debts." "That's what my father always said," replied Arthur, continuing to examine the documents. "But look here, Eleanor. Here's a letter, dated 1954. He began to read aloud. "My dear grandson, if you are reading this, it is because you have finally found what I left for you and your descendants. This property has always belonged to our family, and it always will. Do not believe the lies they may have told about our financial situation. I built this shelter to protect the documents and proof that we are the rightful owners of this land." Eleanor felt her legs weaken and leaned against the wall. "Arthur, do you understand what this means?" "I'm trying to understand," he replied, running his hands through his graying hair. "My grandfather died when I was 10. My father always said he was a dreamer who lost everything betting on bad business ventures." "What if that's not true?" asked Eleanor, her eyes shining with hope for the first time in hours. Arthur continued searching through the papers and found more letters, some addressed to lawyers, others to family members. One in particular caught his attention. "Listen to this," he said, reading another letter. "Silas, we know you've discovered our plans, but it's too late. The documents have been altered, and the authorities have already been informed about your alleged debts. We recommend you accept the situation and leave the property voluntarily to avoid further embarrassment." "Who signed this letter?" asked Eleanor, moving closer. Arthur turned the page and went pale. "It's signed by Frank Harrison and George Harrison." "But those were your grandfather's brothers," said Eleanor, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Exactly. His own brothers conspired to steal the family property. Eleanor sat down again, this time on the floor, leaning against the wall. Tears began to stream down her face again, but now they were different. They were no longer just tears of sadness, but of indignation and disbelief. "Arthur, how many generations of our family have suffered because of this lie?" "I don't know, Eleanor. I don't know anything anymore." They continued exploring the shelter in silence for a few minutes. Arthur opened some cabinets and found more surprises, old photographs of the property, showing a large house where now there was only open field, and detailed maps of the land. "Look at these photos," he said, showing them to his wife. "There was a huge house here. And look where we are on the map. We're right in the middle of the land that belonged to Grandpa." Eleanor took one of the photos and examined it carefully. "Arthur, do you recognize this place?" "No, wait." He took the photo back and looked more closely. "That big tree there in the background, that strange shape of the branches." "It's the tree near Thomas's house," said Eleanor, referring to their eldest son. "Exactly," exclaimed Arthur. "That means that our children know where this land is," Eleanor completed. "They've always known." The weight of this discovery fell upon them like an avalanche. If the children knew the location of the family's ancestral land, why had they never mentioned it? And more importantly, why had they kicked them out of the house just today, when a snowstorm would force them to seek shelter exactly in this place? "Eleanor, do you think—" Arthur stopped, not wanting to verbalize what he was thinking. "That they knew about this?" She completed her husband's thought. "Arthur, our children didn't kick us out of the house out of impatience or lack of space. They kicked us out because they wanted us to find this place. But why? Why would they need us to know about Grandpa's land?" Eleanor stood up and began walking around the shelter again, thoughtful. "Remember when Thomas started working at Dr. Miller's law firm? About 5 years ago, right?" "I remember." "So? Dr. Miller is an expert in land issues and inheritance, and Julian also started working with him 2 years ago." Arthur stopped handling the papers and looked at his wife. "Do you think they discovered about Grandpa's property through their work?" "I think it's more than that, Arthur. I think they discovered that we can claim this land. And I think they also discovered that this land is worth a lot of money nowadays." The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the snow continued to fall and the wind grew stronger. Inside the shelter, 2 elderly people processed the possibility of having been manipulated by their own children. "But if they wanted us to know about this, why didn't they just tell us directly?" asked Arthur. "Because then they wouldn't have to share with us. Think about it, Arthur. If we find out on our own, they can say they didn't know anything. They can pretend to be surprised and still claim part of the inheritance as our direct descendants. But we're their parents. Why would they need to deceive us like this?" Eleanor looked at her husband with a sad but determined expression. "Because, my love, money changes people, even our own children." Arthur went back to examining the documents, this time paying closer attention to the details. In one of the letters he found something that made him stop suddenly. "Eleanor, come look at this." "What is it?" "Here's a letter from Grandpa's lawyer, dated 1955. He says he managed to prove the documents were forged and that the property should be returned to the family. But Grandpa never actually received this letter." "Why?" "Because it's right here, sealed, never delivered." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Arthur, this means that for over 60 years our family has had the legal right to this property, but never knew." The two fell silent for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of the discovery. It wasn't just a matter of money or property. It was a matter of truth, of justice, and of generations of unnecessary suffering. "How many times did you hear your father say he felt ashamed because his own father had lost everything?" asked Eleanor. "Many times. He died carrying that shame." "And how many times did we go without because we thought we weren't entitled to anything? How many times did we fail to give better things to our children because we thought we were a family of losers?" Arthur sat on the bed and covered his face with his hands. "My whole life has been a lie, Eleanor." She moved closer and sat beside her husband, putting her arm around his shoulders. "It wasn't a lie, my love. It was an injustice, and injustices can be corrected. But look at our situation now. Our own children threw us out on the street, and they probably know more about our own family than we do. Then let's find out what they know, said Eleanor, with a determination Arthur hadn't seen in her for years. How? We're going back there to ask. Eleanor, they kicked us out of the house. Do you think they'll welcome us with open arms? I don't know, but now we have something they didn't expect us to have. What? The truth. Arthur looked at his wife and saw in her eyes a strength that surprised him. Eleanor had always been a sweet, submissive woman who preferred to avoid conflict, but something had changed in her in the last few hours. You're right, he said, gathering the most important documents. Let's collect this evidence and go back home. And if they don't want to listen to us, then we'll go see Dr. Miller. If our children work for him, he'll have to explain what's been going on. Eleanor stood up and began organizing the documents in chronological order. Arthur, there's one more thing I'm thinking about. What? If this property was always rightfully ours, and if it's worth as much money as I imagine, why didn't our children just try to convince us to claim it? Why all this charade? Arthur stopped to think about his wife's question. Maybe because they already tried to claim the property without telling us. Exactly. And maybe they discovered they need our signature or our consent for something. Or maybe, Arthur felt a chill in his stomach, maybe they discovered that if they can prove we're incapable of taking care of ourselves, they can assume legal control of our assets. Eleanor stopped organizing the papers and looked at her husband. You mean that maybe they kicked us out of the house not to make us discover this place, but to make us seem disoriented and in need of special care. The possibility was disturbing, but it made sense. If the children could prove the parents were incapable of self-care, they could assume legal control of all the family's assets, including the rights to the ancestral property. But they didn't count on us finding this shelter, said Eleanor, and even less on us finding the proof of the truth about our family. Arthur stood up and went to the staircase, listening to the sounds outside. The snow has stopped falling, he said. So can we go back? We can. But first, I want us to look for something else here. If Grandpa left these letters and documents, maybe he left other important things. The two spent the next hour searching every corner of the shelter. They found more photos, some old jewelry in a small metal box, and a diary written by Silas himself. Listen to this, said Eleanor, reading a page from the diary. March 15th, 1954. I discovered today that my brothers are plotting something against me. I overheard a conversation between them and a man I didn't recognize. They spoke about false documents and how easy it would be to discredit me before the authorities. I need to act fast. And what did he do? Eleanor continued reading. March 20th, 1954. I finished building the secret shelter. I left there all the proof I need to one day restore our family's honor. If something happens to me, I hope my descendants are smarter than I was and find the truth. He foresaw this could happen, and left everything prepared so that one day we could defend ourselves. Arthur closed the diary and stored it with the other documents. There. Now let's see what kind of explanation our children will give us. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The two climbed the shelter's stairs and emerged into a world whitened by snow. The biting cold immediately hit them, but now they had a purpose that warmed them from within. They walked in silence through the snow-covered streets, carrying their 2 suitcases and a folder with the most important documents. Their children's house was only 10 minutes away, but the walk seemed to last an eternity. When they reached the door, Eleanor hesitated. What if we're wrong, Arthur? What if our children really kicked us out because they couldn't stand taking care of us anymore? Then we'll find out now, he said, ringing the bell. It was Thomas, the eldest son, who opened the door. The surprise on his face was genuine, but there was something else there that Arthur couldn't immediately identify. Dad? Mum? What are you doing here? We live here, remember? replied Arthur with a dry tone. But you left. You said you were going to look for another place. We didn't leave, Thomas. You kicked us out, said Eleanor, with a firmness that surprised her son. Thomas looked around, as if checking if anyone was watching, and then opened the door completely. Come in, you must be freezing. When they entered the living room, they found Julian, the youngest son, on the phone. He quickly ended the call upon seeing his parents. Dad, Mom, what a shock, where were you? What a shock. Where? We were worried. We were taking shelter from the snow, replied Arthur, carefully observing his son's reactions. I'm glad you're okay, said Thomas, but his voice sounded forced. Let's talk in the kitchen. I'll make some coffee to warm you up. In the kitchen, the four sat around the table. Eleanor noticed that her sons were exchanging meaningful looks, as if they were communicating silently. Well, Thomas began, we need to talk about your situation. What situation? Asked Arthur. Dad, you're getting old. You need special care. And we're not in a position to provide that here at home. Position? Eleanor leaned forward. Thomas, your house has 6 bedrooms, and the 2 of you live here alone. It's not a question of space, Mom. It's a question of, well, you know, your capacities are a bit diminished. Diminished how? Asked Arthur, feeling his anger rise. Julian intervened, trying to soften the situation. Dad, it's nothing serious. Nothing. But you've been forgetting things, getting dates and names mixed up. What dates? What names? Well, Thomas opened a drawer and took out some papers. Do you remember signing these documents last week? Arthur took the papers and examined them. They were some kind of forms with their signatures at the bottom. I don't remember signing this. What are these papers? They're health plan forms, Dad. You signed them when we renewed your medical coverage. Eleanor took the documents from her husband's hands and read them carefully. Thomas, these aren't health plan forms. This is... She stopped, rereading the text. This is a power of attorney. It's a medical power of attorney, Mom, so we can make decisions about your treatment if necessary. But why would you need that power of attorney now? Asked Arthur. We are perfectly capable of making our own medical decisions. Dad, you spent 2 days lost in the snow. You left the house without saying where you were going, without taking a phone, without telling anyone. If that's not a sign you need help, I don't know what is. Arthur and Eleanor looked at each other. It was true they hadn't said where they were going, but that was because they were abruptly told to leave. Thomas, said Eleanor calmly, we didn't spend 2 days lost in the snow. We spent a few hours looking for a place to take shelter after you told us to leave the house. Mom, no one told you to leave the house. No? Arthur put his hand in the pocket where he kept the shelter documents. Then can you explain why yesterday morning you said you were tired of taking care of 2 stubborn old people and that we'd better look for a nursing home? Thomas turned red. Dad, I was upset. You know sometimes words come out wrong when you're stressed. And you, Julian? Asked Eleanor. Were you also stressed when you said you couldn't stand seeing us around the house anymore? Julian lowered his eyes. Mom, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Then how did you mean it? Asked Arthur, taking the documents out of his pocket. Both sons noticed the old papers their father was holding. What documents are those, Dad? Asked Thomas. They're documents we found while looking for shelter from the snow. Where did you find that? In a place that apparently our great-grandfather built especially to keep this evidence safe. The atmosphere in the kitchen changed drastically. Thomas and Julian exchanged another look, this time clearly worried. What kind of evidence, Dad? Asked Julian. Evidence that the family has always owned a piece of land that was supposedly lost to debts. Thomas stood up abruptly. Dad, where exactly did you find these documents? Why, Thomas? Do you know the place? There was a tense moment of silence. Thomas sat back down, but his posture was visibly altered. No, Dad. I'm just curious about where you spent the night. We spent the night in an underground shelter on the land that belonged to our great-grandfather Silas, said Eleanor, watching her son's reactions closely. Julian let slip a surprised expression that he tried to immediately disguise. You know about this land, don't you? Asked Arthur. Dad, we don't know what you're talking about, said Thomas, but his voice didn't sound convincing. You don't know? Arthur spread the documents on the table. Then can you explain to me how the two of you have been working for a lawyer specializing in land issues for 5 years and never mentioned that our family has rights to a valuable property? Thomas turned pale. Dad, I think you're getting things mixed up. We're getting things mixed up? Eleanor picked up one of the old letters. Then can you explain what this letter from our great-grandfather's lawyer, dated 1955, means? It proves the property sale documents were forged. The two sons were silent for a long moment. Finally, Julian sighed. Thomas, it's no use anymore. They found out. Shut up, Julian. Found out what? Asked Arthur, his voice dangerously low. Julian looked at his brother and then at his parents. Dad, Mom, we can explain. Then explain, said Eleanor. Thomas ran his hands through his hair, clearly agitated. All right, we'll explain. But you have to understand we did this, thinking of everyone's good. Did what? Dad, 3 years ago when I started working at Dr. Miller's law firm, he asked me to research the land history of some properties in the area. One of them was the land where you found that shelter. And during the research I discovered the documents that proved our family has always been the true owner of that land. And why didn't you tell us? Thomas hesitated before answering. Because the situation was complicated. Complicated how? Julian intervened. Dad, that land is worth a lot of money today. There are companies interested in buying it to build a shopping mall. And what's the problem with that? The problem, continued Thomas, is that to claim the property we needed to prove not only that we had a right to it, but also that you, as the closest direct descendants, were in a condition to make legal decisions about the property. Eleanor felt a chill down her spine. What did you mean by in a condition? Mom, you're in your 70s. Any lawyer for the opposing side could argue that you are vulnerable to manipulation or that you don't have the mental capacity to understand the implications of such a large transaction. So you decided you should be the ones to control the situation, said Arthur, beginning to understand. It's not exactly like that, Dad. No? Then what is it like? Thomas took a deep breath. Dad, we thought if we could get the legal power of attorney to represent you in financial matters, we could claim the property and sell it for a good price. Then we would split the money among all of us. Without consulting us. We were going to consult you, Dad, but we wanted to make sure everything was in order before getting your hopes up. And kicking us out of our home was part of this plan? Julian and Thomas exchanged another look. Dad, you weren't exactly kicked out. No? Then what were we? You were directed to discover the truth on your own. Eleanor stood up, indignant. Directed? You humiliated us, made us feel like a burden, threw us out on the street in the middle of a snowstorm. Also, we would discover on our own something you've known for 3 years. Mum, it wasn't exactly like that. That's exactly how it was, Thomas, said Arthur, also standing up. You manipulated the entire situation to get what you wanted without having to treat us like adults capable of making our own decisions. Dad, we were only trying to protect you. Protect? Eleanor was trembling with anger. Protect us from what? From discovering our family had rights we didn't know about, from having the chance to correct a historical injustice, from deciding for ourselves what to do with our inheritance. That's not it, Mom. Then tell me one thing, interrupted Arthur. If you were really thinking of everyone's good, why didn't you come talk to us openly from the start? Why all this charade? Thomas lowered his eyes. Because we thought you wouldn't understand the legal situation. Or because you thought it would be easier to make the decisions for us and then present us with a fait accompli, suggested Eleanor. Mom, it's not like that. No. Then explain these power of attorney documents you had us sign without properly explaining what they were. Julian sighed deeply. All right, you're right to be angry. We were wrong in how we handled this. Wrong? Arthur slammed his hand on the table. You deceived us, manipulated us, humiliated us, and almost made us spend the night on the cold street. And you think you just were wrong? Dad, we never intended for you to spend the night out. We thought you'd find the shelter sooner and come back home the same day. You knew about the shelter? Asked Eleanor. We did, admitted Thomas. Dr. Miller showed us the old property maps. The shelter was marked there. And you thought it would be fun to send us looking for it on our own. That wasn't it, Mum. It was that, well, we needed you to discover the documents on your own. Why? Because if we had brought the documents to you, any lawyer could argue you were influenced or manipulated by us. But if you discovered them yourselves, you'd have full and indisputable rights to the property. Arthur and Eleanor looked at each other. The logic was twisted, but it made some sense. Even so, said Arthur, you had no right to treat us this way. Dad, we know we were wrong, but you need to understand we were trying to do what was best for the family. The best would have been to talk to us from the beginning, said Eleanor. We are your parents. We're not children who need to be deceived for their own good. You're right, said Julian. We apologize. Apologies won't erase the humiliation we felt yesterday, replied Eleanor. And they won't erase the distrust we now have towards you, added Arthur. Thomas stood up and went to the window. Dad, Mom, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But now that you know the truth, we can work together to resolve this situation. Work together? Arthur laughed bitterly. After everything you did, you think we'll trust you to handle this? Dad, you're going to need legal help and we know all the details of the case. Then give us all the details and we'll decide what to do. It's not that simple, Dad. There are complex legal issues involved. Then we'll find another lawyer, said Eleanor. Mom, Dr. Miller is the best specialist in the region for this type of case. Dr. Miller, who allowed his staff to deceive his own clients? Asked Arthur. No, thank you. Julian stepped closer to his parents. Dad, Mom, please, let's forget how we got here and focus on what we can do now. You've discovered you have rights to a property worth a lot of money. That's a good thing. It's a good thing that could have been discovered in a much less painful way, replied Eleanor. I agree. But it's already been discovered. Now we need to decide what to do with this information. Arthur sat back down and spread the documents on the table. First, I want you to tell me everything you know about this property, everything from the beginning. Thomas sat back down as well. All right, Dad. I'll tell you everything. And this time, added Eleanor, no lies, no omissions, and without treating us as if we were incapable of understanding. I agree, Mom. Thomas began to tell the full story. He explained how, 3 years ago, Dr. Miller had tasked him with researching the land history of several properties in the region as part of a larger land regularization project. One of those properties was the land where Silas had built his house, and later, the secret shelter. During the research, Thomas discovered the irregularities in the property's sale documents. He also discovered that Silas's brothers had conspired with influential people of the time to forge a non-existent debt and force the sale of the property. The most interesting part, Thomas continued, is that the property was never really sold. The documents that our great-grandfather's brothers presented were fake, but at the time there was no easy way to verify that. And today there is? Asked Arthur. Today there is. With modern technology, we were able to prove that the stamps and signatures on the original documents were forged. And more importantly, we found the authentic documents in the county clerk's archives, which proved the sale never happened legally. That means that technically, the property always belonged to our family. It has been illegally occupied for over 60 years. Eleanor leaned forward. And who occupies the property now? Currently, it belongs to a construction company that bought it from the descendants of our great-grandfather's brothers, but they bought something that wasn't legally for sale. And this company wants to build a shopping mall? Exactly, and they've already invested a lot of money in the project. If they find out they don't have legal right to the property, they'll lose millions. Arthur let out a low whistle. That's why you thought the situation was delicate. Exactly, Dad. If we claim our rights to the property, we'll be facing a powerful company with a lot of money to spend on lawyers. And you thought it was better to deceive us than to prepare us for this battle. Thomas lowered his eyes again. Dad, we thought it would be better to have everything planned and organized before involving you in the situation. But in the end, it's you who need to be involved, said Julian, because you are the direct heirs of the property. And what if we decide we don't want to be involved in this legal battle? Asked Eleanor. The two sons were surprised by the question. What do you mean, Mom? What do I mean? Julian, we're in our 70s. Do you think we have the energy to face a court fight that could last years against a powerful company? But Mom, we're talking about a lot of money. So what? We've lived our whole lives without that money. We can keep living without it. But it's money you're rightfully owed, insisted Thomas. It is, but perhaps the price to get that money is higher than we're willing to pay. Arthur looked at his wife with admiration. Eleanor had always been wise, but now she was showing a wisdom he hadn't recognized before. Your mother is right, he said. We need to think carefully about whether it's worth entering this battle. Dad, but you can't just give up what is rightfully yours. Yes, we can, Thomas, and perhaps we should. But why? Arthur stood up and went to the window, looking at the snow that still covered the ground. Thomas, your mother and I have spent our whole lives working hard, raising you, making sacrifices to give a better life for our family. We were never rich, but we always had enough. But now you could have much more than enough. For what? We're already at the end of our lives. What do we need a lot of money for now? You could leave a larger inheritance for us and for the grandchildren. Eleanor turned to her sons with a stern expression. Thomas, after everything you've done to us in the last 24 hours, do you think our priority is to leave more money for you? Thomas flushed red again. Mom, I didn't mean that. That's exactly what you said. And that's exactly what both of you have been thinking from the start. That's not true. Of course it's true, Arthur interrupted. You found out you could make a lot of money from this property, and the first thing you thought about was how to gain control of the situation. Dad, don't interrupt me. You didn't think about telling us the truth and letting us decide. You thought about how to manipulate the situation to get what you wanted. We wanted to protect you. That's a lie, said Eleanor. You wanted to protect your own interests, and you thought we were too old to understand or be part of the decisions. Julian sighed. All right, maybe you're right about our motivations, but that doesn't change the fact that you are entitled to this property. No, said Arthur. It doesn't change the fact, but it changes our willingness to fight for that right. What do you mean? We mean, Eleanor replied, that perhaps the wisest thing to do is to simply forget we ever discovered all of this. Mom, you can't be serious. We are very serious. Thomas stood up agitated. Dad, Mom, you can't just ignore a historical injustice. You can't let that company continue to benefit from something that was stolen from our family. Yes, we can, said Arthur. And maybe that's exactly what we're going to do. But why? Because, Eleanor explained, sometimes peace is worth more than justice, and sometimes wisdom lies in knowing when it's worth fighting and when it's better to leave the past in the past. The two sons fell silent for a moment, processing what they were hearing. Dad, Mom, said Julian finally, you can't make this decision now while you're still angry with us. Wait a few days, think it over. We already have, said Arthur, and our decision isn't just about anger, it's about priorities. What priorities? The priority of spending our final years in peace, without fights, without stress, without complicated legal battles. And the priority, Eleanor added, of fixing our family before it's too late. Thomas and Julian exchanged glances, realizing they had profoundly underestimated their parents' reaction. What do you mean by fixing our family? Asked Thomas. We mean, Arthur replied, that what you did to us yesterday broke something between us, and that something is more important than any property or money. Dad, we've already apologized. Apologizing is just the first step, said Eleanor. Repairing the trust that was broken will take much more time and effort. And are you willing to make that effort? Asked Arthur. Of course, Dad. We love you. Then prove it. How? By forgetting this whole property story and focusing on being better sons. Thomas shook his head. Dad, I can't just forget such a great injustice. Can't or won't? I can't. It would be like letting the bad guys win. Thomas, said Eleanor patiently, the bad guys in this story died decades ago. The people occupying the property now bought it in good faith, believing it was a legitimate transaction. But that doesn't change the fact that you were robbed. No, it doesn't change that. But it also doesn't change the fact that fighting for this now will only bring suffering to everyone involved. And what if it brings enough money to secure a comfortable life for you? Thomas, said Arthur, with a firmness that surprised his son. "We already have a comfortable life. We have our health, we have each other, we have children and grandchildren. What more do we need? You could have so much more. And you could lose what you already have trying to get that so much more." Julian leaned forward. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Julian, you saw how you became when you found out about this property. You lied to us, manipulated us, humiliated us. And that was just from knowing the property existed. Imagine how you'll become if we actually get a lot of money from it." "Dad, we won't become like that again." "You won't, are you sure? And we are." "Then explain to me why, even after everything that happened, you're still trying to convince us to fight for this money instead of focusing on apologizing and fixing our relationship." The question left the two sons speechless. "You know why?" Arthur continued. "Because even now, even after seeing the damage greed caused, you're still thinking about money first and family second." "That's not true, Dad." "Yes, it is, Thomas, and you don't even realize it." Eleanor got up and went to the stove, where she started making coffee. "Boys," she said, without turning around, "I'm going to make you a proposal." "What proposal, Mum?" "Let's completely forget this whole property story for 6 months." 6 months? 6 months. During that time, you will focus exclusively on rebuilding the trust between us. You will act as loving and respectful sons, with no ulterior motives, no manipulations, no trying to convince us of anything. And after the 6 months? After the 6 months, if you can prove you've really changed, we talk about the property again. And if you decide we haven't changed enough, then we forget the property forever and focus on being a happy family with what we already have. Thomas and Julian exchanged looks again. "Dad, what do you think of this proposal?" "I think your mother is wiser than I imagined," replied Arthur, "and I think it's a fair proposal. But what if during these 6 months the company finishes building the mall?" "Then that's our tough luck," said Eleanor. "Some opportunities are lost when we don't act at the right time." "But Mom—" "No, Thomas. You had 3 years to handle this situation the right way. You chose to handle it the wrong way. Now the consequences are yours." "That's not fair." "Not fair!" Arthur stood up, angry again. "You deceived us for 3 years. You kicked us out of our home. You made us go cold and afraid. And you think it's not fair to have to wait 6 months to discuss money. Dad, that's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant. And you know what that shows me? That you haven't learned anything from what happened." Eleanor returned to the table with a cup of coffee for each of them. "Boys, listen carefully to what I'm going to say. Your father and I raised you with love, dedication and sacrifice. We never asked for anything in return except respect and affection. Yesterday you showed you have neither respect nor affection for us." "Mom, let me finish. Now we are giving you a chance to show you can be better people. People who value family more than money. If you can't do that, then maybe it really is better for us to keep our distance from each other." "You're emotionally blackmailing us," said Thomas. "No, Thomas," replied Arthur. "You're the ones who emotionally blackmailed us yesterday when you made us feel like a burden to justify your greedy plans." "Dad, that's not it." "That's exactly it. And now that we've discovered the truth, you're trying to pressure us again to get what you want." Julian sighed deeply. "All right, I accept Mother's proposal." Thomas looked at his brother, surprised. "Julian." "No, Thomas. Mother is right. We messed up badly, and if we want to regain their trust, we have to prove we've changed. But 6 months is a long time. The company could finish the project in that time. Then we'll have to accept that possibility. Julian, you're being irrational." "Irrational?" Julian turned to his brother. "Irrational is what we did to our parents. Irrational was lying, deceiving, and manipulating the people we love most in the world for money. We did it thinking of everyone's good. That's a lie, Thomas. We did it thinking of our own good. And you know it." Thomas fell silent for a moment, processing his brother's words. "Julian is right," said Eleanor. "And the fact that you're still trying to justify what you did shows you still don't understand the gravity of the situation. Dad, Mom, I understand you're hurt." "Hurt?" Arthur shook his head. Thomas, you didn't hurt us. You betrayed us. And betrayal is much more serious than hurt. Dad. Thomas, I'm going to ask you a question, said Eleanor. If the situation were reversed, if we had lied to you and your brother, humiliated you in public, kicked you out of the house, and then tried to justify it all by saying it was for your own good, how would you feel? Thomas fell silent, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of what they had done. You would feel betrayed, Eleanor continued. You would feel that the people you trusted most in the world deceived you in the worst possible way. That's how we're feeling right now, Arthur added. And you want us to simply forget that and focus on the money? No, Dad. I hadn't thought of it that way. Then think about it now. Thomas lowered his head and remained silent for a long time. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. Dad, Mum, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. We know you are, said Eleanor, but being sorry isn't enough. You need to show that you've truly understood what you did wrong and that you're willing to change. How can we show that? By accepting our proposal to wait 6 months without discussing the property, said Arthur. And by using that time to act like sons who truly love their parents, Eleanor added. Thomas looked at Julian, who nodded encouragingly. All right, Thomas said finally. I accept the proposal. Are you sure? Asked Arthur. Yes, Dad. And I promise I'll use these 6 months to prove I can be a better son. Eleanor smiled for the first time since they had arrived home. That's all we wanted to hear. But, Arthur continued, you understand that if we discover any lie or manipulation during these 6 months, the proposal is cancelled and we forget about the property forever. We understand, Dad. And you understand that our trust in you has been deeply shaken and that it will take a lot of time and effort to rebuild it. We understand. Then let's start right now, said Eleanor. First thing, you're going to help us take our things back to our rooms. Of course, Mum. Second thing, tonight we're having dinner together as a family, without talking about property, money, or work. We'll talk about good things. Third thing, Arthur added, tomorrow you're going to help us organize all the documents we found and store them in a safe place. Not to use now, but to preserve our family's history. We agree, Dad. As the four climbed the stairs to take the suitcases back to the rooms, Eleanor whispered to her husband, Do you think they've really changed? I don't know, Arthur replied, but at least now they understand they have to change. And if they can't? Then at least we discovered the truth about our family, and that's worth something. And if they can, then maybe in 6 months we'll have not only our property back, but also our sons back. Eleanor smiled and squeezed her husband's hand. Either way, at least now we know who we really are. And we know we're stronger than we imagined. That night, the four had dinner together for the first time in months. The conversation was a bit forced at first, but gradually became more natural. Thomas and Julian made an effort to be attentive and caring, and Arthur and Eleanor gradually relaxed. After dinner, while Eleanor washed the dishes and Arthur read the newspaper in the living room, Thomas approached his mother in the kitchen. Mum, can I talk to you? Of course, son. Mum, I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for what we did. And it's not just because you found out the truth, it's because I realized we hurt the people I love most in the world. Eleanor stopped washing the dishes and turned to her son. Thomas, I believe you're sorry. But do you understand why it's so hard for us to trust you now? I understand, Mum, and I know we'll have to work hard to earn back that trust. You won't have to work, son. You'll have to want to work. And you'll have to do it from the heart, not because you want something in return. I want to, Mum. I want to be a better son. Eleanor smiled and touched her son's face. Then you will. In the living room, Julian had sat down next to his father. Dad, can I ask you something? Go ahead, son. Are you really willing to give up that property if we can't prove we've changed? Arthur lowered the newspaper and looked at his son. Julian, can I ask you a question? Sure. What's more important to you? Having parents who trust you or having more money in the bank account? Julian thought for a moment before answering. Having parents who trust me. Then you already have your answer. Dad, but what if it's possible to have both? It might be possible, but if I have to choose one, I'll choose to have sons I can trust, even if it means giving up a lot of money. Julian, your mother and I have already given up many things in life. We gave up better jobs to stay close to you when you were children. We gave up trips and luxuries to pay for your education. We gave up many personal dreams to fulfill your dreams. I know that, Dad. And we've never regretted those choices, because we did everything out of love, not self-interest. Dad, I want to learn to make choices out of love too. Arthur smiled and put his hand on his son's shoulder. Then you're on the right path. That night, for the first time in a long while, all four slept peacefully in the same house. The following days were a period of gradual adjustment. Thomas and Julian made an effort to be attentive and caring, but it was still possible to see they were trying very deliberately to be better sons, rather than simply being. 1 week after the discovery, Eleanor found Arthur in the garden, thoughtfully looking at the trees still covered in snow. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking if we did the right thing," he replied. "With the boys? With everything, with the property, with the boys, with our life." Eleanor sat next to him on the garden bench. "Arthur, do you regret finding out the truth about your family?" "No, I regret finding out the way I did. What if we had found out differently? Maybe we would have made different choices." "Like what?" "Maybe we would have fought for the property. Maybe we would have stood up to the construction company." "And now you don't want to do that anymore?" Arthur sighed. "I don't know, Eleanor. Part of me wants to fight for justice, wants to correct this historical injustice, wants to show the world that our family are not losers." "And the other part?" "The other part is tired of fighting. It's tired of proving something to anyone. It just wants to live in peace for the years we have left." "And which part is stronger?" "Today, the second one. But I don't know if it will always be that way." Eleanor took her husband's hand. "Arthur, we don't need to decide anything right now. We have 6 months to think, to see how our children behave, to decide what kind of people we want to be from now on. And if after 6 months I decide I want to fight for the property, then we will fight together. And if I decide I don't want to, then we won't fight, and that will be okay too. You don't care about the money." Eleanor smiled. "Arthur, if I cared about money, I would have married that rich merchant who was courting me before I met you." "Why don't you care?" "Because I've learned, over a lifetime, that the most important things cannot be bought. Health, love, peace, a united family, those things are priceless. But money can help get some of those things. It can. But it can also destroy others. Look what happened to our children when they found out about the possibility of getting a lot of money. They changed. Exactly, and not for the better. Do you think they can go back to being how they were before? I think so. But it will take time." At that moment, Thomas appeared at the back door. "Dad, Mom, can I talk to you?" "Of course, son." Thomas approached but remained standing, looking nervous. "Dad, Mom, I have a confession to make." Arthur and Eleanor looked at each other, worried. "What confession?" asked Eleanor. "Early today, Dr. Miller called me to the office. He wanted to know if you had already made any decision about the property." "And what did you say?" "I said you were still thinking." "That's true." "Yeah, but he pressured me to try to convince you to act soon." "Why?" "Because the construction company is getting suspicious of something. They hired lawyers to investigate the property's legal situation." Arthur stood up. "Does that mean they could find out the truth on their own?" "Possibly. And if they find out, they might try to settle the situation before you take any action." "How?" "They might try to make a deal directly with us, offering money to give up our rights." "And would that be legal?" "It would be, if you agreed." Eleanor stood up too. "Thomas, why are you telling us this?" "Because I promised I wouldn't lie or withhold important information anymore." "And what did Dr. Miller say when you refused to pressure us?" "He said, if I couldn't convince you within a week, he would come speak with you himself." Arthur ran his hand through his hair. "This changes things." "How so, Dad?" "If Dr. Miller comes here trying to pressure us, it will shatter our peace. And if the construction company finds out on its own and tries to make a deal, It will also shatter our peace. What do you want to do? Eleanor looked at her husband. Arthur, perhaps it's time we made a definitive decision. What kind of decision? Either we completely forget this whole story and ask everyone involved to leave us in peace, or we take control of the situation and deal with it proactively. And which do you prefer? Arthur, I prefer that we decide our own future, not that other people decide it for us. Arthur nodded. You're right. Thomas, call Dr. Miller and schedule a meeting for tomorrow. Dad, are you sure? We are. If we have to deal with this situation anyway, we prefer to handle it our way. And does Julian need to be involved too? He does. After all, if we decide to fight for the property, it will affect all of us. That evening, the four of them gathered in the living room for a serious conversation. First of all, Arthur began, I want to make it clear that the final decision about the property is ours, Eleanor's and mine. You can give your opinions, but you cannot try to influence us. We understand, Dad. And if we decide to fight for the property, you will support us without trying to take control of the situation. Yes, Dad. And if we decide not to fight, you will respect our decision and not insist on the matter. Yes, Dad. Very well. Now let's discuss the options. Eleanor leaned forward. The first option is to simply sign a document relinquishing any rights to the property and ask everyone to leave us in peace. What would be the advantage of that? Asked Julian. The advantage would be that our lives would return to normal immediately. We wouldn't have to deal with lawyers, lawsuits, pressure from anyone. And the disadvantage? The disadvantage would be that we would be definitively giving up something that is rightfully ours. The second option, Arthur continued, is to fight for the property to the end, facing the construction company in court. What would be the advantage of that? Asked Thomas. The advantage would be that we could recover what has always been ours and correct a historical injustice, and possibly gain a lot of money in the process. And the disadvantage? The disadvantage would be years of legal battle, stress, pressure, and the possibility of losing everything in the end. Is there a third option? Asked Julian. There is, said Eleanor. Try to negotiate directly with the construction company. How so? Find the owners of the company, explain our situation, and see if we can reach a friendly agreement. What kind of agreement? Perhaps they pay compensation for the irregular occupation of the property, and we give up claiming it. Would that be better than a lawsuit? It would be faster and less stressful, Arthur replied. But it might result in less money. And there is a fourth option too, Eleanor added. Which one? Sell our rights to the property to the construction company itself for the fair market value of the land. How so? Instead of claiming the property to then sell it, sell our rights directly to the party already occupying the land. Would that be legal? It would be, if done correctly. The four of them fell silent for a few minutes, thinking about the options. Dad, Mom, said Thomas finally. Which option do you prefer? We don't know yet, Arthur replied. That's why we're going to talk with Dr. Miller tomorrow. We want to better understand the implications of each choice. And after the talk with Dr. Miller? Then we'll think for a few days and make our decision. Can I give my opinion? Asked Julian. You may. I think you should try direct negotiation with the company. It would be the most civilized way to resolve the situation. Why? Because that way you get something without harming anyone too much. The company doesn't lose the investment it has already made. You receive some compensation for the injustice, and everyone is at peace. Thomas, what is your opinion? Asked Eleanor. I think you should fight for the full rights, not just for the money, but for justice. Why? Because if we don't fight for justice when we have the opportunity, we are allowing injustices to keep happening. Arthur looked at his wife. And you, Eleanor, what do you think? What? I think all options have advantages and disadvantages, but I also think the most important thing is not which choice we make, but why we make that choice. How so? If we choose to fight for money, we'll become greedy people. If we choose to fight for justice, we'll become just people. If we choose to give up for peace, we'll become wise people. If we choose to give up out of fear, we'll become cowards. So the motivation is more important than the decision itself. I think so. And what motivation would you like to have? Eleanor thought for a moment. I would like to make a decision based on love for our family and the desire to do what's best for all of us, including our children and grandchildren. That's a good motivation, agreed Arthur. The next morning, the four of them went together to Dr. Miller's office. It was an elegant office in the city centre, with expensive furniture and a very formal secretary. Dr. Miller was a middle-aged man, well-dressed with a commanding presence. He greeted everyone cordially, but Arthur sensed a tension in the air. Mr. Arthur, Mrs. Eleanor, said Dr. Miller, after everyone had sat down, I imagine your sons have already informed you about the property situation. Yes, they have, replied Arthur. And have you made any decision yet? We are still evaluating our options. That's why we came to talk with you. Very well. Let me explain the legal situation clearly. Dr. Miller opened a folder and began showing documents. Based on the research we've done, you have an indisputable legal right to the property. The documents proving the sale were forged, and we have sufficient evidence to prove this in court. What does that mean in practice? Asked Eleanor. It means that if you file a lawsuit, you have an excellent chance of recovering the property. You also have the right to compensation for the irregular use of the land all these years. How much money are we talking about? The property is worth approximately $5 million today, and the compensation for irregular use could reach an additional $2 or $3 million. The four fell silent, processing the numbers. And what would be the timeline for a lawsuit? Asked Arthur. Between 2 and 5 years, depending on appeals. And the costs? We can work on a contingency fee basis. You wouldn't need to pay anything up front. And the chances of winning? I'd say they're at least 80%. And if we lose? If you lose, you pay nothing for our services. But you also receive nothing for the property. Eleanor leaned forward. Dr. Miller, is there a possibility of negotiating directly with the construction company? There is. But they would likely offer much less than what you would receive through a lawsuit. How much less? Perhaps $1 or $2 million instead of $8 million. It would still be a lot of money for us, commented Arthur. It would be, but it would be much less than what you are entitled to. Dr. Miller, said Thomas, which option would you recommend? Professionally, I would recommend the lawsuit. You have a very strong case, and the potential value is very high. And personally? Asked Eleanor. Dr. Miller hesitated for a moment. Personally, well, you need to consider your age, your health, your stress level, and what you really want from life. What do you mean? Mrs. Eleanor, you and your husband are in your 70s. A long and complicated lawsuit can be very stressful. Perhaps a quick negotiation is more suitable for your situation. Even if it means receiving less money, money is only worth something if you can enjoy it in peace. Arthur was surprised by the lawyer's honest answer. Dr. Miller, can you help us arrange a direct negotiation with the company? I can. In fact, they have already approached me indirectly. How so? They found out we're investigating the legal situation of the property and sent a representative to see if we were representing anyone interested in contesting ownership. And what did you say? I said I couldn't discuss details without my client's authorization. So they already know we exist? They know someone exists, but they don't know it's you specifically. And what do you suggest we do? I suggest we schedule a meeting with the company's representatives for an initial conversation. No commitments, just to understand what kind of settlement they'd be willing to make. Arthur looked at Eleanor, who gave a slight nod. All right, let's schedule that meeting. Excellent. Can I schedule it for next week? Yes. But before that, Eleanor interjected, we'd like to visit the property in person. What for? To see with our own eyes what has been done with our family's land. Dr. Miller agreed and offered to accompany them on the visit. 2 days later, the 5 of them went to the property. It was a clear morning with the snow from earlier in the week already melted. When they arrived at the site, Arthur and Eleanor were shocked by what they saw. Where there had once been open fields, there were now the foundations of a huge shopping mall. Construction machinery was scattered across the entire plot, and dozens of workers were laboring on the project. My God, whispered Eleanor. They've already started construction. And by the looks of it, they've already invested a lot of money, Arthur added. Dr. Miller approached. This could be an advantage for you in the negotiation. How so? The more they've invested, the more motivated they'll be to reach a settlement instead of risking losing everything in a lawsuit. Arthur walked over to where he had found the entrance to the secret shelter. The spot was now completely altered, with concrete and machinery everywhere. The shelter, he said to Eleanor. They've covered the shelter. It was to be expected, she replied. They didn't know the historical importance of the place. Our entire family history was down there. The history is in the documents we saved, and most importantly, in the lessons we learned. Thomas and Julian approached their parents. Dad, Mom, what are you feeling? Asked Julian. I'm feeling sadness, Arthur answered. Sadness to see the place where my grandfather was born transformed like this. But also relief, Eleanor added. Relief? Relief to see that we're no longer the only ones responsible for preserving the memory of this place. Now it will exist in a different way, but it will still exist. Dr. Miller approached the group. Mr. Arthur, would you like to walk around the entire property? No, Arthur replied. We've seen enough. Have you made any decision yet? Not yet, but we're closer to making one. On the way back, Eleanor asked her husband, Arthur, what did you feel when you saw all that? I felt anger at first, anger at seeing our history being erased. And then I felt acceptance, I think. I realized that land will continue to exist, just in a different way. And does that bother you? It does. But not enough to want to fight for years to change the situation. So you already know what decision you want to make? I think so. And you? I think I do too. That night, Arthur and Eleanor talked alone in their room. Eleanor, I've decided I want to try to negotiate with the company. Me too. Not for the money, but for justice. How so? I want them to know that property wasn't rightfully theirs. I want them to acknowledge that our family was wronged, and I want some compensation for it. Even if it's less money than we could get in a lawsuit. Even then. Because this way we can resolve everything quickly and focus on what really matters, which is rebuilding our family, to enjoy our last years in peace, and to leave a better example for our grandchildren. Do you think our children will be disappointed that we didn't try to get as much money as possible? If they are, it will be an important lesson for them about values and priorities. And if the company doesn't want to negotiate, then we think about what to do. But first, let's see if there's a possibility to resolve this in a civilized manner. A week later, Dr. Miller scheduled the meeting with the representatives from the construction company. It was a large company, headquartered in New York City, that was heavily investing in commercial projects in the region. The meeting took place at Dr. Miller's office, with Arthur, Eleanor, Thomas, Julian, Dr. Miller, and 3 company representatives present: the legal director, the project manager, and another lawyer. The legal director, Mr. Almera, got straight to the point. Mr. Arthur, Mrs. Helena, we understand you believe you have rights to the property where we are building our shopping mall. We don't believe, replied Arthur. We know we do. Well, our legal research shows we purchased the property legally from the registered owners. Dr. Miller intervened, showing the documents that proved the forgery of the original papers. Mr. Almera, as you can see here, the original sale documents were forged. The property never legally ceased to belong to Mr. Arthur's family. The company's lawyer examined the documents carefully. These documents appear authentic, he admitted, but that doesn't prove our purchase was invalid. Yes, it does, replied Dr. Miller. If the original sale was based on forged documents, all subsequent transactions are invalid. That is a matter that would have to be decided in court, said Mr. Almera. It may be, agreed Arthur, but we prefer to try to resolve this amicably. What are you proposing? Eleanor leaned forward. We are proposing that you acknowledge our family has legitimate rights to the property and that you pay us fair compensation for the unauthorized occupation of the land. In exchange for what? In exchange for us formally relinquishing any claim to the property. How much compensation are you asking for? Dr. Miller answered, $3 million. The silence in the room was long. The company representatives exchanged looks and whispers. That's a lot of money, Mr. Almeida finally said. It's much less than you would pay if you lost a lawsuit, replied Dr. Miller, but it's much more than we would pay if we won the case. Your chances of winning are minimal, given the documents we have. We will need time to analyze the proposal, said the project manager. How much time? Asked Arthur. 1 week. All right, but we want a definitive answer in 1 week. After the company representatives left, Dr. Miller turned to the family. Do you think they will accept? I don't know, replied Eleanor. But we've done our part, and if they don't accept, then we decide whether we want to file a lawsuit or give up on everything. Arthur stood up and went to the window. Dr. Miller, in your opinion, what are the chances they will accept? I'd say 50%. They will calculate the financial risk of a lawsuit versus the certain cost of paying the compensation. And if they calculate it's worth risking the lawsuit, then you have to decide whether you want to fight or give up, and would you recommend fighting? Mr. Arthur, professionally, I would recommend fighting. You have a very strong case. But personally, well, you already know my opinion on this. That week, Arthur and Eleanor spent a lot of time talking about the future. The sons respectfully kept their distance from the discussions, honoring their promise not to try to influence their parents' decision. Arthur, Eleanor said one evening, regardless of what happens with this property, do you feel at peace with our choices? I do. And you? I do too. I think we did everything the right way, within our means. Even if we get nothing in the end? Even then. Because we've already achieved the most important thing. What? We discovered the truth about our family. We reclaimed our dignity, and we forced our sons to rethink their priorities. Do you think they've really changed? I think they are changing, and that's already a lot. And if we receive the $3 million, then we'll have to decide what to do with so much money. Have you thought about it? I have. And you? I've thought about it too. And what did you think? I thought perhaps we should use some of the money to create a foundation in memory of your grandfather. What kind of foundation? A foundation that helps elderly families who have been deceived or exploited by relatives or third parties. Eleanor smiled. It's a beautiful idea. And the rest of the money we could divide among our children and grandchildren, but only after we were sure they had learned to value family more than money. I completely agree. And if we don't receive the money, then we'll create the foundation in other ways, with our time, our experience, our modest resources. Would you be willing to do that? I would. It would be a way to give meaning to everything we've been through. At the end of the week, Mr. Almeida called Dr. Miller asking for a new meeting. This time the meeting was briefer. Mr. Almeida got straight to the point. We've decided to accept your proposal. Arthur and Eleanor looked at each other surprised. Accept completely? Asked Dr. Miller. Yes, $3 million in exchange for the formal relinquishment of any claim to the property. And the payment? It can be made in up to 3 monthly installments. We have a deal, said Arthur. Great. Our lawyers will prepare the documents. After Mr. Almeida left, the family was alone in Dr. Miller's office. Dad, Mom, said Thomas, congratulations, you did it. We did, confirmed Eleanor. But now comes the harder part. What part? Finding out if this money will make us better or worse people. Julian approached his parents. Dad, Mum, can I make a suggestion? Go ahead. What if you set this money aside for a while before deciding what to do with it? Why? To make sure that when you decide, you'll be deciding for the right reasons. Arthur smiled. Julian, I think you're starting to truly understand what's important in life. I'm learning, Dad. 3 months later, Arthur and Eleanor received the final payment from Peak Horizon Construction. During that period, they didn't touch the money, leaving it invested while they reflected on what to do. Thomas and Julian had shown themselves to be very different during those months. They were more considerate, more respectful, and seemed genuinely interested in their parents' well-being rather than their own interests. One afternoon, the 4 of them gathered in the living room for an important conversation. Boys, Eleanor began, Your father and I have decided what to do with the money." "And what was the decision?" asked Thomas. "We decided to create the foundation we talked about, and we also decided to give a portion to you." "How much?" "For each of you, $200,000. Thomas and Julian were surprised. "Just that?" asked Thomas. Eleanor looked at her son seriously. "Just that, Thomas?" Thomas immediately realized his mistake and turned red. "Sorry, Mom, that's not what I meant. $200,000 is a lot of money. I was just surprised because I thought you were going to divide everything equally between us. We're not going to split everything equally because we don't think it's what's best for you." "How so?" "Thomas, Julian," said Arthur, "you are young, you have energy, you have the capacity for hard work, you have your whole lives ahead of you. You don't need a lot of money from your parents' inheritance to be successful." "But Dad, let me finish. What you need is to learn to value what truly matters in life, and too much money too easily can hinder that learning." "And the rest of the money?" asked Julian. "The rest we will use for the foundation, to travel a bit, to have a comfortable old age, and to leave something for our grandchildren when they become adults." "Don't you trust us?" asked Thomas. "We trust you more than we did 6 months ago," replied Eleanor. "But we still think you need to prove more that you've really changed." "How can we prove it?" "By not being disappointed or angry with our decision about the money." The two sons were silent for a moment. "Dad, Mom," said Julian finally, "I think you made the right decision." "Why?" "Because if you had given us a lot of money now, maybe we wouldn't have kept striving to be better people." "And you, Thomas?" asked Arthur. "What do you think?" Thomas took longer to answer. "Dad, I'll be honest. Part of me was disappointed. I still have to fight against the greed I discovered I have. And the other part? The other part knows you're right and is proud to have such wise parents." "Which part is stronger?" "Today, the second part, and I hope it always stays that way." Eleanor stood up and hugged both sons. "Boys, you have no idea how proud we are to hear that." "Why?" "Because it shows you really learned from everything that happened." A year later, the Silas Sterling Harrison Foundation was fully operational. They had helped dozens of elderly families who had been deceived or exploited by relatives or third parties. Arthur and Eleanor worked as volunteers at the foundation, dedicating a few hours each day to help people in situations similar to what they had experienced. Thomas had changed jobs, leaving Dr. Miller's law firm to work as a lawyer for the foundation itself. Julian had become the financial administrator of the institution. "You know what makes me happiest?" Eleanor said to Arthur one afternoon, after helping a lady who had been deceived by her own son. "What?" "It's seeing that our sons chose to work with us out of love and not for personal gain." "And how do you know it's out of love?" "Because they could be earning much more money in other jobs. But they preferred to stay here helping people and rebuilding our family." "Do you think they've really changed?" "I think we all have changed for the better. Even me. Especially you." "How so?" "Arthur, before all this happened, you were a good man, but a bitter one. You carried the weight of the shame your father felt over your grandfather's supposed defeat. And now you are a good man at peace. You discovered that your family was always dignified, always had value, always deserved respect. And did that change anything in how I see myself?" "It changed everything. You stand taller, you speak with more confidence, you smile more. You've become the man you always were inside, but didn't know you could be on the outside." Arthur reflected on his wife's words. "You're right. I feel different. And I feel different too." "How?" "I feel stronger, wiser, more capable of making difficult decisions. You were always strong and wise." "I was, but I didn't know it. Now I do." That evening, the four of them had dinner together as they always did now. The conversation flowed naturally, with laughter, jokes, and the genuine affection that characterizes healthy families. During dessert, Thomas made an announcement. "Dad, Mom, Julian and I want to tell you something." "What is it?" "We've decided to create a family fund to complement the foundation's work." "How so?" "We're going to donate 10% of our salaries every month to help more families in vulnerable situations." Eleanor was moved. "Boys, you don't have to do that." Yes, we do, Mom, said Julian. We need to because that's how we learn to value money, by using it to help other people. And also, Thomas added, because it's our way of honoring the memory of our great-grandfather Silas and everything he stood for. Arthur stood up and hugged both sons. Boys, you have no idea how proud I am of you. We have an idea, Dad, because we're also proud of you and Mum. Why? Because you taught us that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing, and that family is more important than money. 2 years after the discovery of the secret shelter, the family was gathered to celebrate Arthur's 75th birthday. The party was simple, at their own home, with their children, daughters-in-law and grandchildren. During the party, the eldest grandson, a 16-year-old teenager, approached his grandfather. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Of course, my boy. Is it true that you found out you were entitled to a lot of money and chose to keep only a little? Arthur smiled. Why are you asking that? Because my dad told me the story, but I didn't really understand why you made that choice. What didn't you understand? Why didn't you take all the money you could? It wouldn't have hurt anyone and you could have had a much better life. Arthur sat down next to his grandson. Son, let me tell you something. Your grandmother and I didn't choose to have little money. We chose to have a lot of other things. What other things? Peace, dignity, a united family, life purpose, and the satisfaction of knowing we did the right thing. But don't you think you missed an opportunity? No, son. We think we gained the most important opportunity of all. Which one? The opportunity to show our children and grandchildren that there are things more valuable than money. The teenager became thoughtful. And did it work? What do you think? I think it did work, because my dad changed a lot after that story. He became more affectionate, more present, less worried about work, and more concerned with family. Then it was worth it. Grandpa, if it all happened again, would you make the same choices? Arthur looked at Eleanor, who was playing with the other grandchildren in the living room. Not every choice, no, but the main ones, yes. Which ones would you change? Maybe we would have talked to your parents from the beginning, instead of letting them find out about the property on their own. Why? Because then we would have avoided the unnecessary suffering for all of us. But if you had done that, do you think my dad and my uncle would have learned the lessons they learned? Arthur stopped to think about the question. You know what? Maybe they wouldn't have learned. Then maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. Maybe you're right, my boy. That night, after everyone had left, Arthur and Eleanor were alone in the kitchen, washing the party dishes. Eleanor, are you happy with the life we have today? I am very happy, Arthur. And you? I am too. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. Why? Because I discovered that we are stronger than we thought, wiser than we believed, and more important than we imagined. And we discovered that our children are better people than they seemed to be on that terrible day. And we discovered that money can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how we handle it. What was the most important lesson you learned from all this? Arthur stopped washing the dishes and looked at his wife. I learned that sometimes life's biggest storms lead us exactly where we need to be. How so? If our children hadn't kicked us out of the house, if we hadn't found that shelter, if we hadn't discovered the truth about our family, none of this would have happened. None of what? The foundation, the reconciliation with our children, the discovery of who we really are, the peace we feel today. You're right. The storm brought us home. And what was the most important lesson you learned? Eleanor smiled and dried her hands on her apron. I learned that it's never too late to discover we are braver than we thought. And I also learned that sometimes wisdom lies in knowing when to fight and when to let go. And I learned that family is like a plant. It needs constant care, but when it's well cared for, it bears sweet fruit for a lifetime. Arthur hugged his wife. Eleanor, thank you. For what? For staying by my side throughout this journey, for being wise when I wanted to be stubborn, for being brave when I wanted to be a coward, for believing we could be happy even without all that money. Arthur, I'm the one who should thank you. For what? For teaching me that it's never too late to start over, for showing me I can be stronger than I imagined, for sharing with me not just the problems, but also the solutions. Do you think we'll be able to make the most of the years we have left? I'm sure we will, because now we know what really matters. And what really matters: love, family, purpose, and the peace of knowing we did the best we could with what we had. 3 years after the discovery, Arthur was sitting on the same garden bench where he had talked with Eleanor about their decisions. But this time he was accompanied by an 80-year-old lady who had sought out the foundation because she had been deceived by her own daughter. "Mr. Arthur," said the lady, Mrs. Martha, "do you think I should forgive my daughter?" "Mrs. Martha, forgiveness isn't something we do for the person who hurt us. It's something we do for ourselves." "How so?" "When we forgive, we're not saying what the person did was right. We're saying we won't carry the weight of resentment anymore." "But what if she hasn't changed? What if she's still the same greedy person?" "Then you forgive, but are cautious. Forgiveness doesn't mean we have to trust again. It just means we choose peace over bitterness." "Did you forgive your children?" "I did." "And do you trust them again?" "I do, but it was a long process. They had to prove over a long time that they had truly changed." "How did they prove it?" "Through consistent actions, not just pretty words." "And if they hadn't changed?" "Then I would have forgiven them anyway, but kept my distance to protect my peace." "Do you regret anything?" Arthur thought for a moment. "I regret not discovering sooner that our family had value and dignity of its own, regardless of what others thought of us." "And did that change anything in your life?" "It changed everything. I spent my whole life carrying a shame that wasn't mine, and a guilt that shouldn't have existed." "And how did you get rid of it?" "By discovering the truth about our history, and choosing to believe what I discovered instead of what others told me for decades." Mrs. Martha got up to leave, but stopped and turned to Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, may I ask one more question?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" Arthur smiled. "I am happier than I ever thought I could be, Mrs. Martha. Why? Because I learned that happiness doesn't come from having a lot of money or perfect health or a life without problems. Happiness comes from knowing who we are, why we're here, and what difference we're making in the world. And do you know these things?" "I do. I know I am a man who chose family before money, truth before convenience, and forgiveness before revenge. I know I am here to care for the people I love and to help people like you. And I know I'm making a difference because I see families being rebuilt every day through the work of our foundation." Mrs. Martha smiled and touched Arthur's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Arthur. You have helped me so much." "Mrs. Martha, you are the one who helped me." "How?" "By reminding me that every person we managed to help makes everything we went through worth it." After Mrs. Martha left, Arthur was alone in the garden, reflecting on everything that had happened since that terrible day they were driven from their home by their sons. Eleanor appeared at the back door. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that sometimes life has a strange way of giving us exactly what we need." "How so?" "We needed to discover who we really were, and life gave us a situation that forced us to find out. And we needed our sons to learn to value family more than money, and life gave us a situation that taught them exactly that. And we needed a purpose for our later years, and life gave us the foundation and all the people we've been able to help. Do you think we are lucky people? I think we are blessed people. What's the difference? Lucky people get good things by chance. Blessed people manage to turn even bad things into blessings." Eleanor sat beside her husband on the bench. "Arthur, if you could leave one piece of advice for our grandchildren about everything we've lived through, what would it be?" Arthur thought carefully before answering. "I would tell them that money is a tool, not a goal. That family is a treasure that needs to be cared for every day. That truth is always worth more than convenience, and that it's never too late to start over when we discover we were on the wrong path." "And what would your advice be?" "I would say that sometimes the people we love will disappoint us, but that doesn't mean we should stop loving. It means we must learn to love wisely." "What else?" that forgiveness is not weakness, it is strength, that choosing peace is not cowardice, it is courage, and that sometimes the most difficult decision is also the right one. Do you think they will understand this advice? Perhaps not now, but one day when they face their own storms, they will remember and understand. And is that enough? It is more than enough. It is all we can do. Plant seeds of wisdom and trust they will grow at the right time. At that moment, Thomas appeared in the garden. "Dad? Mum, can I talk to you?" "Of course, son." Thomas approached, looking emotional. "Dad, Mum, I have some news for you." "What news?" "The foundation has been selected to receive a national award for social responsibility." "Really?" asked Eleanor, surprised. "Really? And you two have been nominated to receive the award personally in Washington, D.C. Arthur and Eleanor looked at each other, surprised. "But we didn't create the foundation to receive awards," said Arthur. "I know, Dad, but you deserve to be recognized for the good you are doing." "And what does this award mean?" "It means your work is serving as an example for other people across the entire country, and it also means we will receive additional funding to expand the foundation's work." Eleanor stood up, moved. "Arthur, do you realize what this means?" "What?" "It means that secret shelter we found wasn't just a place where your grandfather stored documents. It was the place where he planted a seed that is only now bearing fruit." "How so?" "Your grandfather built that shelter to preserve the family's dignity, and today, because of what we found there, we are preserving the dignity of hundreds of other families." Arthur fell silent for a moment, absorbing the meaning of his wife's words. "Eleanor, do you think Grandpa Silas imagined this could happen?" "I think he imagined that one day the truth would come out and that our family would regain its honor. But I don't think even he imagined it could result in so much good for so many people." "Dad, Mom," said Thomas, "can I say something?" "Go ahead, son. I feel so proud to be your son." "Why?" "Because you could have used everything you discovered only for your own benefit, but you chose to use it to help other people. Thomas, it was you who taught us that." "How so?" "You showed us how money can corrupt even the people we love, and that taught us that the only safe way to handle money is to use it to do good." "Dad, I want to apologize once again." "Why?" "Because today I completely understand the harm we did to you, and I also understand how generous you were to give us a second chance." "Thomas, we've talked about this many times." "I know, Dad, but it's important for me to keep acknowledging my mistakes and thanking you for your forgiveness." "Why?" "Because that way I don't forget the lessons I learned and I don't make the same mistakes again." Eleanor hugged her son. "Thomas, that is the sign that you have truly changed." "How so, Mum?" "People who have truly changed do not forget where they came from and do not stop being grateful for the forgiveness they received." That night, during dinner, Julian made an announcement. "Dad, Mum, Thomas and I have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" "We want to create a book telling your whole story." "Why?" "Because we think other families could learn from what you went through." "And what would this book be like?" "It would be the complete story, from the discovery of the shelter to the creation of the foundation. It would show how a family can overcome even the worst conflicts when it chooses love instead of pride." "And who would write it?" "The two of us, with your help to tell the details that only you know." "And what would the goal be?" "The goal would be to show other families that it's never too late to mend broken relationships, and that sometimes the greatest tragedies can turn into the greatest blessings." Arthur looked at Eleanor. "What do you think?" "I think if our story can help other families, it's worth telling." "Then let's do the book." 6 months later, the book, The Secret Shelter, a story of forgiveness and new beginnings, was launched and became a national success. Hundreds of families contacted the foundation, saying the story had inspired their own reconciliations. On the day of the launch, Arthur was being interviewed by a journalist. "Mr. Arthur, what was the most difficult moment in this whole story?" "The most difficult moment was when we realized that our own children had deceived and manipulated us." "And the most rewarding moment?" "The most rewarding moment was when they apologized sincerely and began to show through actions that they had truly changed." If you could summarize the whole experience in one sentence, what would it be? Arthur thought for a moment. Sometimes we need to be broken to discover how strong we are. And what advice would you give to families going through similar conflicts? I would say that true love always includes forgiveness, but true forgiveness always includes change. It's not enough to apologize. You must prove you are willing to be a different person. And if the person is not willing to change, then you forgive anyway for your own peace, but you protect your family by keeping a safe distance. One last question. Do you consider yourself a wealthy person? Arthur smiled. Reporter, I consider myself the richest man in the world. Because of the property money? No, because of the family I won back, the purpose I found, and the peace I have in my heart. After the interview, Arthur and Eleanor returned home, where they found the whole family gathered to celebrate the book's success. Grandpa, Grandma, said the youngest granddaughter, a 10-year-old girl, are you famous now? Why do you ask that, my dear? Replied Eleanor. Because my teacher said you are helping many families all over Brazil, and that makes us famous. It makes you heroes. Arthur knelt down to the girl's level. My dear, we are not heroes. We are just ordinary people who learned that doing the right thing is always better than doing the easy thing. And how did you learn that? We learned through the mistakes we made and the forgiveness we received. Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. How so? I want to help families who are having problems. And why do you want to do that? Because you taught me that the most important thing in life is to have a family that loves each other. Eleanor was moved by her granddaughter's words. My dear, if we managed to teach you that, then everything we went through was worth it. 5 years after the discovery of the secret shelter, Arthur and Eleanor were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. The party was grand, with relatives, friends, and dozens of families that had been helped by the foundation. During the party, the eldest son gave a speech. Father, Mother, 5 years ago I made the biggest mistake of my life. I threw you out of the house, thinking only of my own interest. Today I can say that mistake turned into the greatest blessing for our family. Why? Someone in the audience asked. Because it forced us to discover who we really are, to value what truly matters, and to build a family based on true love instead of convenience. Father, Mother, thank you for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a better son, and thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over. When Thomas finished speaking, Arthur stood up to respond. Thomas, Julian, thank you for learning from your mistakes and becoming the men we always knew you could be. Eleanor and I want to take this opportunity to make an announcement. What announcement? Asked Julian. We have decided that when we can no longer run the foundation, the two of you will take on the responsibility of continuing the work. Father, Mother, it is a great honor, said Thomas. But it is also a very great responsibility, added Eleanor. You will be responsible for preserving not only the foundation's work, but also the values it represents. What values? That family is more important than money. That forgiveness is stronger than revenge. That true love always includes a second chance. And that sometimes the greatest storms lead us exactly where we need to be. That night, when everyone had left, Arthur and Eleanor were alone in the kitchen, as they always were after parties. Eleanor, are you happy with the life we've built? I am more than happy, Arthur. I am fulfilled. Why? Because we managed to turn our greatest pain into our greatest joy. How so? Our greatest pain was discovering our sons had betrayed us. Our greatest joy was discovering they could change and become better people. And you have no regrets? I have only one. What is it? I regret not believing in my own worth sooner. I spent too many years feeling inferior, ashamed without the right to dream of better things. And has that changed? It has changed completely. Today I know I am a strong, wise woman capable of making a difference in the world. And what else has changed? I learned that age is not a limitation, it's experience. That problems are not punishments, they are opportunities. And that a happy ending is not the absence of difficulties, it's the presence of true love to face those difficulties. Eleanor, thank you. Why? for being my companion all these years, for helping me discover who I really am, for making this beautiful life we have today possible. Arthur, I am the one who thanks you. Why? For teaching me it's never too late to grow, for showing me I can be brave when I need to be, for sharing with me not just the dreams, but also the courage to achieve them. 10 years after the discovery of the secret shelter, Arthur was hospitalized. At 82, his health had begun to decline, but his mind remained lucid and his heart at peace. At Eleanor, Thomas, Julian, and all the grandchildren were by his side. "Father," said Thomas, "there is something I want to say to you." "What is it, son?" "Thank you for teaching me that being a man is not about never admitting mistakes. It's having the courage to admit mistakes and change." "And thank you," added Julian, "for teaching me that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share." "Father, mother," said the eldest granddaughter, now a 20-year-old young woman, "do you want to know what the greatest gift you gave us is?" "What?" asked Eleanor. "You gave us the example of how a family should be, of how people who love each other should treat one another, of how to resolve conflicts without destroying relationships. And you gave us," added another grandchild, "the certainty that no matter what happens in life, our family will always be our safe harbor." Arthur smiled, with tears in his eyes. "Children, do you know what the greatest lesson I learned in this whole story was?" "What, Grandpa?" "I learned that sometimes God allows us to go through the worst storms to show us how much stronger we are than we imagined. And I learned that family is not just blood, it's choice, it's forgiveness, it's love that grows instead of diminishes when it's tested." "Grandpa, are you afraid?" asked the youngest grandson. "Afraid of what, my son?" "Afraid of not being here anymore." "No, son, I'm not afraid." "Why?" "Because I know I left the world a little better than I found it. I know our family is united and strong, and I know the work we began will continue through you." "And I know," added Eleanor, "that our family's story will be remembered not for the mistakes we made, but for the love we chose." 3 days later, Arthur died in peace, surrounded by all those he loved. At the funeral, Thomas gave the final speech. "My father was a man who taught by example that it is never too late to start over, that true love always includes forgiveness, that family is the most precious treasure we can have. He taught me that being a son is not just about receiving, it's about giving back, that being a father is not just about protecting, it's about teaching, that being a family is not just about living together, it's about choosing to love every day. Father, thank you for giving me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for teaching me to value what truly matters. And thank you for living in such a way that I will always be proud to be your son." The greatest legacy my father left was not money. It was a united family, a foundation that has already helped thousands of people, and the example of how to live with dignity, love, and purpose. Father, rest in peace. Your mission here was fulfilled with praise. 2 years after Arthur's death, Eleanor, now 80, remained active in the foundation, but had passed the main responsibility to her children. One afternoon, she was sitting on the same garden bench where she had so often talked with her husband when Thomas approached. "Mother, may I speak with you?" "Always, son." "Mum, sometimes I think about what would have happened if we hadn't made that terrible mistake of kicking you out of the house." "And what do you conclude?" "I conclude that maybe we would never have discovered the truth about our family. Maybe we would never have learned to value what truly matters. Maybe we would never have created the foundation." "And does that give you peace with what happened?" "It does. Not because what we did was right, but because we managed to turn our greatest shame into our greatest achievement." "Thomas, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Mom. Your father told me shortly before he died that he regretted nothing of what we had lived through. Why? Because everything led us exactly to where we needed to be. It led us to a life of purpose, of true love, and of making a real difference in the world. Mom, do you have any regrets?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "I have just one." "What is it?" "I regret not having believed sooner in the power of forgiveness. I spent years of my life carrying small grudges, that could have been resolved with an honest conversation. And did that change anything in how you live today? It changed everything. Today I forgive quickly, I love generously, and I live as if each day were a gift. Because it is, right, Mum? That's exactly it, son. Each day is a gift, and I intend to enjoy every one of them until the end. 6 months later, Eleanor died in her sleep with the same tranquility with which she had lived her final years. At the funeral, Julian gave the final speech. My mother was a woman who taught us that strength is not never crying. It's crying when you need to, and moving forward when the pain subsides. She taught us that wisdom is not never making mistakes. It's learning from mistakes and using those lessons to help other people. She taught us that love is not a feeling that comes and goes. It's a choice we make every day, especially when we don't feel like loving. Mum, thank you for teaching me that family isn't perfect, but it can be beautiful. That people aren't born ready, but they can grow. That a happy ending isn't the absence of problems, but the presence of love to face those problems. The greatest gift my mother left us was a family that knows how to forgive, support, and love each other unconditionally. Mum, rest in peace beside Dad. You planted seeds of love that will keep growing through us for many generations. 5 years after Eleanor's death, the Silas Sterling Harrison Foundation had become one of the country's most respected organizations in the field of elder protection and family reconciliation. Thomas, now the foundation's executive director, was giving a lecture to a group of lawyers about family mediation. Gentlemen, he said, I want to tell you how my family learned that justice and revenge are very different things. When we discovered that our family had been robbed decades ago, our first reaction was to want to recover everything that was taken from us, no matter the cost. But my parents taught me that sometimes getting everything we think we deserve can cost more than we are willing to pay. They chose to accept less money to have more peace. They chose forgiveness instead of revenge. They chose to rebuild family instead of destroying relationships. And the result? A united family, a foundation that has already helped thousands of people, and a legacy of love that will pass on for many generations. The lesson is simple. Sometimes winning less is, in fact, winning much more. After the lecture, a lawyer approached Thomas. Dr. Thomas, may I ask a personal question? Of course. Do you truly not regret not fighting for all the money your family could have gotten? Thomas smiled. Doctor, my parents could have gotten $8 million if they had chosen a long and draining lawsuit, and they only got $3 million from the deal. Exactly. A $5 million difference. And that doesn't bother you? No. Do you know why? Why? Because with those $3 million, we created a foundation that has already helped over 5,000 families. My parents lived their final years in total peace. Our family became united and strong. I became a better person. How much do those things cost? Thomas thought for a moment. They're priceless. They are literally incalculable. So you gained more than you lost? Doctor, we gained infinitely more than we lost. 20 years after the discovery of the secret shelter, Julian was visiting his parents' grave with his own children, now grown. Dad, said his eldest son, tell us the story about Grandpa and Grandma again. Why do you want to hear it again? Because every time you tell it, we learn something new. Julian knelt before the grave and began. Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Eleanor were ordinary people who went through an extraordinary situation. They were betrayed by their own children, but they chose forgiveness. They discovered they were entitled to a lot of money, but they chose peace. They could have become bitter and vengeful, but they chose to become people who make a difference in the world. And what was the most important lesson they left us? The most important lesson, said Julian, his eyes filled with tears, was that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about forgiveness. It's about love that grows instead of shrinking when it's tested. And they taught us that it's never too late to start over, that money is a tool, not a goal, that true justice includes compassion, and that sometimes the biggest storms lead us exactly where we need to be. Dad, said his daughter, what do you miss most about them? I miss their wisdom. The way they could see the good side of the most difficult situations, their ability to forgive without holding a grudge. But mainly, he added, looking at the grave, I miss the certainty they gave me, that no matter what happened, our family would always be united. And now, Dad, without them, how do we know we'll stay united? Julian smiled and hugged his children. Because they didn't just leave us money or property. They left us values. And values don't die with people. They pass from generation to generation through example. And what example did they leave us? They left us the example that true love always finds a way, that a united family can weather any storm, and that sometimes losing something small leads us to gain something much greater. At that moment, a gust of wind rustled the trees around the cemetery, and Julian had the feeling that his parents were there approving his words. Father, Mother, he said, speaking to the grave, thank you for teaching me that being rich isn't about having a lot of money. It's about having a family that loves each other, a purpose that motivates us, and the peace of knowing we did the best we could with what we had. I promise I will pass these values on to my children as you pass them on to me. And I promise that the Silas Sterling Harrison Foundation will continue helping families for many generations. Rest in peace, your story continues through us. When they left the cemetery, the youngest grandson of Arthur and Eleanor, now a 25-year-old young man, asked a question. Uncle Julian, what happened to that shelter where our great-grandparents found the documents? The shopping mall was built over it. Why do you ask? Because I sometimes think it would be cool if we could visit the place where it all began. Julian smiled. My son, the place where it all began wasn't the shelter. It was in your great-grandparents' hearts, when they decided to choose love instead of hate. And that's a place we can visit every day. How? By making the same choices they made, choosing forgiveness instead of revenge, family instead of money, peace instead of pride, love instead of selfishness. Uncle, can I ask a question? Of course. Do you think our great-grandparents ever knew all the difference they made in the world? I think so. I think before they died, they could see they turned our family's greatest shame into our greatest achievement. And I think they died knowing they planted seeds of love that will keep growing for many, many generations. How do seeds of love grow, Uncle? Through every family we manage to help reconcile, through every person who learns that forgiveness is possible, through every child who grows up in a united family because their parents learned from our story. And through each one of us, Julian continued, who chooses every day to be a better person because of the example they left us. Uncle Julian, when I have children, will I tell them this story? You will, and when your children have children, they will tell it too. Why? Because some stories are too important to be forgotten, and the story of your great-grandparents is one of those stories. It's a story that teaches that it's never too late to start over, that family is the most precious treasure we can have, and that sometimes the biggest storms lead us exactly where we need to be. And so, the story of Arthur and Eleanor continued living through the generations, reminding everyone that true love always finds a way, that forgiveness is always possible, and that a united family can weather any storm. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you are listening from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Arthur and Eleanor made the right decisions? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.